Good morning, everyone. Welcome on this chilly morning to our first live webinar. My name is Candice Liebenberg, and today we are going to be in conversation with Mungo Park and Andrew Dinny, where we will be talking about supply chain challenges and opportunities in the retail sector arising from this COVID pandemic. The aim for today's discussion is to have a series of questions over the next 20 minutes with Andy and Mungo, after which we will open up the floor for your questions. So feel free to please submit your questions at any time during the webinar using the Q&A button at the bottom right-hand side of your screen. It's a little block with a question mark in it, and you can type in your question there and submit it, and we will open up the floor for Mungo to address those at the end of approximately the 20-minute session. So over to you, Andy and Mungo, and thank you everybody for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Candice. Really appreciate that. And a very good day to all our webinar audience. As mentioned, my name is Andy Dinny. I'm the Sales Director for the Air and Sea Division. And I'm in the fortunate position today to be asking all the questions. Mungo, who I'll introduce now, will be answering. And given the uncertainty of COVID, I think we'll give him a little bit of a break if there are a few interesting observations. But I'd like to introduce Mungo Park, a veteran member of the DSV Air and Sea team, been with us around 18 years and heads up our retail vertical within the business, and has got a little bit of business experience, I guess plus 25 years or so, and he'll give us some further insights on the pressure on the inbound supply chain. So Mungo, we've just passed 60 days in lockdown, heading towards level 3. But I'm sure there's some general observations. So what can you share in terms of the effect of COVID-19 pandemic on retailers globally?
Thanks, Andy, and good morning, everybody out there. It's good to be here with you this morning. I think, Andy, that the suddenness and the magnitude of this disruption caught people by surprise. I was thinking what would happen if we went into a global war scenario. Well, that would probably start off in a localized fashion and would give us some warning before it actually became a global conflict. And I think that we would have more time to respond to an event like that than we actually had in terms of the ability to respond to this COVID pandemic. First, we knew about it with some infections in China, then Italy looked pretty bad, and before we knew it, we were locked down for 3 weeks, which then became 5, etc. And I think there was almost no time for anyone to respond. And in saying that, I think that no matter what preparations one had made, no matter how prepared one was for disruption, no matter how one had no matter how much one had assessed supply chain resilience and redundancy, I don't think anything could have prepared a retailer, for example, for a 5-week shutdown, an inability to trade in that period, inability to move stock, inability to do anything, and simply to sit and wait for it to come to an end. So I think that really has caught retailers short, and I think they're still reeling from the impact of that. I think recovery is going to be slow, and I think it is going to be a hard, bumpy road to recovery, and there will be a number of curveballs and significant bumps along the way. But I do think that if as an organization you have made an investment in the supply chain and made some investment in good supply chain visibility and have sight of your supply chain, that would mean that you could recover more quickly than someone who doesn't have that level of visibility. So I think organizations who have made some investment in supply chain are possibly better placed than others to recover more quickly. And again, it gives supply chain an opportunity to demonstrate its value to the business in terms of how it can help organizations recover from the challenges which they're currently facing.
Thanks, Mungo. That makes sense. So bring it closer to home. what do you think the challenges are for African retailers faced at the moment, and how long do you think the recovery period will be locally?
Well, that's quite a good question, and we were trying to understand that at DSV. So what we did was we ran a fairly short survey with our customers and received what I thought was a fairly good response. We received 130 responses to the survey, which is pretty good under the circumstances. It was a cross-divisional, cross-industry survey, but more than 30% of the responses were from retailers and fashion retailers. So it gave us the ability to really assess what the sentiment was in that industry. Coming out of that, we saw probably three main challenges anticipated by those retailers. The first one really was the clearing of the backlog once the lockdown ended, getting what was in storage out of storage, because as you know, if it wasn't essential, it got stuck into storage and there was not much you could do about it. It couldn't be delivered to customer premises. So clearing that backlog, they believed was going to be the largest challenge. The second challenge they anticipated was actually bringing in new orders from origin. So having been locked down particularly at this time, it means that retailers selling clothing have had a significant dent in their ability to sell their winter stock, and are missing a good slice of the winter season. But what is looming, and quite quickly, is the summer season. So it's really important that they're able to move and bring in summer stock as quickly as possible and as planned. So that was the secondary concern, the ability to move new orders from origin. And I think the last one that they raised was reducing inventory. So sitting on a lot of inventory, being unable to trade for 5 weeks, and sitting on this inventory, having been unable to generate cash. So really wanting to turn that inventory into cash going forward. So you'll be seeing a lot of sales. You've seen a lot of sales of online merchandise, in fact, where reductions of 30% are not uncommon. You'll see the same thing, I think, in stores as more and more stores are able to trade, more and more sales, simply trying to convert that inventory into cash, which is a major problem, the cash flow problems. The second question you asked me was really about how long do you think it will last, and that was another question we had in our survey, which also had a fairly wide range of response. Now, because the survey was issued round about 2 weeks into the first lockdown, I think we were still anticipating a 3-week lockdown and then a quick recovery, or hoping for a quickish recovery. So in that respect, about 25 to 30% of the responses indicated that they thought there'd be a recovery and a return to business as usual within about 1 to 3 months. And looking at that now, really, that was fairly optimistic and hopeful. I don't think that is a reality. About 40% thought it would take between 3 and 6 months, and then the remaining probably 30-odd% thought it would be more than 6 months. Personally, I think it is going to take longer than the 3 months, certainly more like 6 months. I think if there aren't any major bumps, the supply chain can recover in about 6 months and support the business. But I think business recovery is going to take a lot longer. I think they may be able to attain a level of stability within about 6 months, but that level of stability will be nothing like the level of performance that we're experiencing just prior to the lockdown. And I think it's going to take 18 to 24 months if the path is fairly smooth for a full business recovery, and probably even longer if, for example, we have to go back to a level 4 or level 5 scenario briefly. All of those kind of additional disruptions are just going to prolong the pain, basically. Yeah, so I think that was quite a useful bit of feedback we got, and I think we're seeing that most agree that it's a fairly long road to recovery.
Thank you. Good insight. And certainly, no doubt, there's definite pressure on infrastructure. So maybe you could just comment and tell us more from a logistics point of view. What are the infrastructural challenges that are facing retailers at the moment?
Andy, I think by infrastructure, you're talking about kind of the air and ocean type challenges which you're experiencing. And in both areas, there have been significant challenges. If we look at the ocean side, we've seen the problem with storage, with nothing being able to move to a distribution center. So clearing of the backlog is going to be the initial huge problem. And we're seeing that that is a problem. The queue into Durban Port, for example, on Monday was 7 kilometers long. It's taking a truck 5 to 7 days to get into the port, to collect a container and get out again. This is being exacerbated by trucks dropping off empty. So somebody who's been lucky enough to get his cargo out of the port is now trying to deliver the empty, which is just exacerbating the problem. So there are huge challenges there. I think moving forward, we're going to see eventually an uptick in capacity as ocean freight starts to move more freely. But carriers are really only anticipating that from about the end of June, early July, to see the uptake in ocean freight volume. With that, we're going to see, I think, an increase in rates and possibly a real spike in rates as the demand for capacity increases. And what we will see, unfortunately, is a spike in bunker. You may ask, why will there be a spike in bunker? That, especially with the low oil price, well, that'll primarily be because the low sulfur surcharge has been zero rated during this difficult period because of the lack of demand for capacity, and that will kick in again. So we know what that was before the lockdown, and that was quite significant. So that could have a significant impact on the bunker surcharge. So I think we should prepare ourselves for a spike in freight rates and a spike in bunker going forward. If we look at the air freight has also been extremely challenging. We've seen a 28% drop in air freight capacity globally. And we went through a stage of uncertainty in terms of air freight into South Africa, which has stabilized to some extent, but it's still not great. We have a number of carriers flying into South Africa, but we basically lost the belly capacity which we had in passenger flights. And while some airlines have restrung their passenger fleet to be a pseudo cargo fleet, loading cargo in and out of passenger doors is actually a problem. So that's causing further delays. But freight is flying into South Africa. The problem with China, for example, is that there's such a huge demand for PPE equipment, which is your masks and your thermometers, etc. Globally, there's a huge demand. That is causing huge congestion at Chinese airports. So it's taking a truck, for example, 72 hours to get into an airport to offload for flight, leading to them missing flights. The lead time to actually get onto a flight is about 9 to 10 days. The freight rate is somewhere in the area of $13 to $15 a kilogram. So there are huge challenges there. And then once you actually get on a flight and it moves, it gets here, and then there are further delays when it gets to South Africa with the terminal handling and the ground handling agents. So there's certainly a number of challenges in air freight. And I guess until passengers start flying again, and we don't know when that's going to be. I saw Greece last night desperately trying to set up air bridges to attract tourists to the Greek islands for the summer. I'm not sure how successful they're going to be, but I think it's going to be a long time before we start attracting passenger traffic into South Africa. So I think that air freight challenge is going to last for some time, with fluctuation in rate and high rate for a fairly protracted period of time as well.
Mm-hmm. All right, so certainly some significant challenges on the shipping side. Maybe just a note to the audience, if you do have any questions, if you wouldn't mind using the chat panel that you can have access to, and if you could start putting your questions down now. We've got 2 more questions left for Mungo, so that would be nice if you can. So Mungo, moving on, what do you think the short to medium term supply chain priorities should be for a retailer?
Well, I think with any supply chain, communication is going to be absolutely essential. It is essential in any case, but now it's even going to be more important. Communication and collaboration with all stakeholders across the supply chain. So that means from supplier all the way through to customer, and possibly even in some cases, not only tier 1 suppliers, but tier 2 and 3 suppliers, because disruption of tier 2 and 3 suppliers is going to impact you as severely as a disruption for a tier 1 supplier. So I think that's going to be important. So communication is going to be absolutely key, and working with stakeholders and partners in the supply chain to facilitate that. I think visibility is going to be absolutely critical. You need to be able to know what's happening in your supply chain. You need to be able to spot an event failure as quickly as possible and intervene proactively to remedy that as quickly as you can. So supply chain visibility is going to be key, and putting together some kind of control tower is going to be essential. Now, when I talk about a control tower, I don't mean you have to dash out and spend a fortune on expensive software to get a view of your supply chain, because there just isn't time to do that. A control tower is really just a single view of your end-to-end supply chain. And for a small business or small retailer, you can actually build a control tower on Excel and populate it with information via telephone calls and emails, as long as you're recording every event in that status report or in that Excel spreadsheet. So that is effectively a control tower, but you need a central point from which to be managing your supply chain. So the control tower is important. I think if you are using a service provider who offers business intelligence tools, which you can use to get supply chain visibility, and you aren't using those services yet, I think you should avail yourself of the opportunity to make use of those services from that service provider. A few service providers have made this an investment in decent business intelligence software, and I think you should be trying to engage with a service provider who has that capability. And of course, there are other organizations who are large enough to have made that investment themselves, so they have the luxury of having their own visibility solution or control tower. But visibility, as I say, is going to be key, and rapid response to disruption is going to be fundamental to the ongoing smoothish running of your supply chain.
Thank you. So that's short to medium term. Let's look further down the line. So what are some of the longer term initiatives that you think retailers should be considering right now?
Well, I suppose one could call this an opportunity for supply chain redesign. But certainly in the longer term, and I think not at this present stage, but certainly moving forward, there is an opportunity for retailers to examine their end-to-end supply chain, to map the end-to-end supply chain, as I said, from basically tier 1 and 2 suppliers all the way through to delivery to a customer, to identify weak spots, to identify potential points of failure, to identify areas where they need redundancy, to identify certain supply chains of high priority or high value merchandise where they actually will need a secondary supplier, and actually start setting that up. So I think an end-to-end supply chain mapping exercise will be key. I think segmenting your supply chains is going to be key as well, because typically there's an approach of one size fits all in South African supply chain management, and all organizations have more than one supply chain in that organization. In simplistic terms, a fashion retailer has fashion and has replenishment. Both supply chains behave very differently, with different priorities and different business expectations from those two supply chains. So it will be important to segment your supply chains and then prioritize those supply chains, and then address challenges in each supply chain based on the priority you've assigned to that supply chain. Tools you could use, and I've always been a great advocate of SCORE, because I think that enables you to understand and unpack an existing supply chain, and then enables you to identify supply chain improvement initiatives and projects which you can initiate to improve your supply chain and to strengthen your supply chain, make it more robust and resilient. And I think it's going to be important for businesses to invest in supply chain skills. I know some larger businesses have done that, but some maybe smaller retailers and smaller large suppliers need to consider investing in supply chain skills rather than just logistics operation skills. Understanding some supply chain best practices and starting to apply those in their business. And I think it'll be necessary to identify partners who can help you with that. And I do know that there are some service providers who actually have those sorts of skills. So as I said at the beginning, partnership and collaboration is going to be key. And working with suppliers, logistics service providers, even carriers, to actually strengthen and create a robustness in your supply chain is going to be fundamental to future success and protection against future disruptions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mungo. Very insightful. Some great ideas there. I see we've reached our time. Are there any closing comments from you before we hand back to Candace to handle the Q&As? I guess maybe just some highlights.
Well, I think it has been a very difficult period and challenging. And I think it took people a while to acclimatize to what they were facing. Once the panic settled, I think there's been huge operational focus. And from what I've been seeing in our organization, for example, has been operational excellence, which I hadn't previously believed possible, and cooperation and collaboration between customers and ourselves, which has been very pleasing, and really working much more closely together and seeing each other more as partners. So I think that's been a strength, and I think we need to build on that. I think partnerships, I've always been an advocate of partnerships in supply chain, and I think this is maybe a catalyst to building stronger partnerships. So I think that is good. And I think, as I said right at the beginning, I think it's an opportunity for supply chain to position itself as a real value contributor to business. I'm passionate about supply chain with all the involvement I've had with supply chain over the years. And I really think supply chain is able to add significant value to a business, bottom line, as well as ensuring ongoing business continuity. So to all supply chain and logistics professionals out there, I would say this is your moment, and really rise to the occasion and offer what you're able to do. Offer that to your business and to your organization, and let them see the value of their supply chain in their business.
Super, Mungo. Thank you so much. We're not going to let you off the hook yet. I'm going to hand you back to Candace, who's going to prompt you with a few questions. Over to you, Candace.
So, Mungo, we've got 4 questions that have come in from the floor, and thank you for those that have submitted. For the rest of you with questions top of your mind, please feel free to continue submitting on the new tab. So the first question, Mungo, is from Barry, and he asks, do you think that home delivery in the FMCG market will continue to increase post-lockdown, or do you think that consumers will return to their previous purchasing habits?
Well, I personally think this is a great opportunity for online shopping to really grow and to come into its own. I think people are going to shy away from returning to the malls. There are going to be people returning to malls, but I think the growth in online is going to be significant. So, yeah, good question, Barry. The proof of the pudding will indeed be in the eating, as they say. But yeah, I think it's a great opportunity for online retailers, and possibly for those who haven't been into online retail to move into that space now.
Mungo, Eddie asks, what is the feeling around global businesses and supply chains disinvesting from China as a primary source and investing in multiple sourcing options globally?
I think that's a conversation that has been going on for some time. I know a number of years ago when there was that huge spike in the oil price, American supply chain consultants were predicting that there would be a move, an inshoring and nearer sourcing of product from China. So moving maybe to South America for more product, etc. I think it's going to be quite difficult. I think there may be a move towards it, but depending how quickly things normalize and how stable the supply chain is, it's going to take a while for people to move away from China. They are just simply so dependent on China, and I think China is going to work very hard to retain what they have. They may make all sorts of concessions to retain the business and trade that they have with retailers all around the world, and make it more costly to move away from China. And at the end of the day, when you're a retailer, it certainly does come down to cost. But I think people are seriously going to think about more replication of suppliers and trying to move away from China. Moving away from Asia is going to be also a question. So if you move from China to Vietnam or to Bangladesh, how much better off are you than having moved to an in-country operation? So I think it'll certainly be considered and looked at as we go through that longer-term supply chain redesign initiative, but it will take time for that shift to happen, and China will kick and scream against it.
Fair enough. We have a question from Nico Talyard. He asks, as economies get under pressure, businesses are going to be under pressure to survive. How do you manage the risk of a service provider who could go under, and that affects the security and the movement of your stock?
That's an excellent question, Nico. My natural answer would be pick a reputable large service provider who is more likely to survive this period. So I think that really is all I can say to that. You need to try and de-risk your supply chain, and so really choose a reputable large service provider who has got the ability to ride out the storm and stay in business and protect your business. So yeah, I think that's a good question, and I think everyone should be examining their service providers and assessing whether or not they can withstand these kind of shocks to their supply chain. So good question. Thank you, Nico.
Brett asks, in your opinion, when comparing pre versus COVID moment, should demand and forecasting initiatives be reviewed in terms of priority within the retailer supply chain planning? And if so, what is the potential advantages of doing so?
Sorry, read that question again. When?
So, should demand and forecasting initiatives be reviewed in terms of priority within the retailer supply chain planning? And if so, what are the potential advantages of doing so?
Well, the answer is yes. However, South African retailers are locked into such a long procurement cycle. They can be placing orders 10 months in advance in anticipation of demand. So yes, they will do, and I'm sure as they go through their future planning cycles, they will, but they really are locked into a sourcing plan a long way in advance, and it is difficult for them to adapt that in the short term. Maybe what it will lead to is shorter planning cycles. That is possible when having been through this disruption, they'll be able to understand the implications of protracted planning cycles. But I guess a fashion retailer, for example, has a shorter planning cycle and is replenishing every month, or like a Zara, which is replenishing every 3 days. They would probably be better off in this kind of situation. So ideally, yes, they should look at the demand planning and forecasting, but it's going to be difficult to adjust that for a lot of the South African retailers.
Thanks, Mungo. Rory Becker thanked you for your insights up to this point, and his question is around the impact on ocean freights out of the Far East and Middle East, and whether we are likely to see, given the inevitable focus on stock turns and reducing stock levels over the coming months, will the reliability in terms of space and transit times be affected as a result of that?
Well, I said earlier, I think as the demand for volume increases, there is likely to be a constrained availability of space, which I said would be picking up probably for June, July. So I think there is going to be that constraint. How quickly the carriers respond to that remains to be seen, but I think given that the carriers have lost so much over the last couple of months, they will be scrambling like crazy to increase rates to recover some of their lost income. For example, the air freight industry is projected to lose between 63 and 113 billion US dollars as a result of this this COVID pandemic. So the losses have been significant, and so they certainly will be tempted to artificially constrain volume in order to make up some of the losses that they've incurred thus far. Rory, I hope that answers your question.
Nico has another question from earlier, Mungo, and he says, we've seen an uptake of electronic communication throughout the supply chain and businesses. How do you see the development of blockchains to redefine cooperation within the supply chain? And second to that, what is DSV doing with respect to blockchain?
Again, Nico, thank you for that. Certainly, as DSV, we have been running blockchain pilots, and we have an innovation team which is certainly looking at that and seeing how appropriate it is and when it is likely to be relevant to the industry. The challenge as I see it is that for financial transactions, it makes a lot of sense. But if you are a retailer procuring from suppliers in China and factories which are deep in a China or a Bangladesh, for example, all of the stakeholders along the chain need to buy into the blockchain process. And each of them needs to contribute to that and to agree to abide by the processes which are imposed on it by blockchain and have access to that technology. So I think it'll be a while before we see it in retail. Before we see it in retail and in supply chain, but you may see it in elements of supply chain, and you may be able to selectively implement it with long-term buying agents and large suppliers with whom you've had an extended relationship, whereby the retailer, the large supplier, and the service provider and the financial institution can be connected in the blockchain. But I think blockchain may be a little bit like RFID. It's been around for a long time, and benefits have been recognized, but it's taken quite a long time to be accepted and to really start being integrated into the business. So I think blockchain could be a bit like that, although that is my personal opinion. And my disclaimer is I'm not a blockchain expert.
Thanks, Mungo. If you were to sum up how you believe DSV's approach has been different during this time, and perhaps even going forward, how would you summarize that for us?
Well, I think DSV has become incredibly operationally focused over this last time, and I said that earlier. And I think we've got much closer to our customers through this difficult time. We've had to work closely with them, and they've had to work closely with us, and we've had to help them where we can with their suppliers. And I think, as I said earlier, that is building more of a culture of partnership, which is what the supply chain relationship needs to be. It needs to be a culture of partnership with your service providers, and I think DSV has been able to rise to that. I know people have been working extraordinarily long hours trying to keep the boat afloat, simply just chasing shipments on an hourly basis. Chasing shipments before they leave origin, chasing shipments when they're being transshipped, chasing shipments when they arrive, etc., simply to keep the boat afloat. And I imagine that every other service provider has been doing the same. It is I mean, it's been an incredibly challenging time for us, and I'm sure it has been for other service providers. And hopefully, I think we've learnt a lot from it. I think what we've uncovered is we've needed to be quite innovative during this period in terms of making some things happen. And I think some of the lessons we've learned through making it happen in this difficult period will be sustained going forward and will become business as usual practices in terms of our operation.
Thanks, Mungo. I think it's been a good 40-minute session. Thank you for allowing us to pick your brain today. Andy, thank you for hosting this session. And given the amounts of change that's still anticipated and coming our way with some of the complexities and challenges you've already alluded to today, it might well beg the question as to whether we should do another one of these, Mungo, as things evolve and we can start sharing more practices around increasing the robustness in supply chain. So we hope we get the opportunity to have a further session with you. But thank you again for your time today, and especially to the audience that has joined us and attended. We trust that you have found this beneficial, and we look forward to engaging with you further in the future. Thank you, Mungo. Thank you, Andy.
Pleasure.
Goodbye.